A Taekwondo champion storms into a peaceful community center, targeting elderly martial arts students with vicious mockery and physical violence. The arrogant fighter shoves a 78-year-old Korean War veteran to the ground, then threatens terrified seniors while his crew films for social media content. But the quiet instructor stepping forward to defend his students isn't just another old man. This is Donnie Yen, the legendary six-time world karate champion. The cocky bully has no idea he just picked a fight with a martial arts master who's spent decades perfecting the art of controlled destruction. While the champion brags about his Olympic dreams and viral fame, the Wing Chun legend approaches with surgical precision that signals imminent devastation. The elderly students recognize their protector's true power and step back, knowing their tormentor is about to learn a lesson in real martial arts. The Taekwondo fighter keeps posturing for his cameras, thinking he's about to humiliate another weekend warrior, but he's actually recording his own professional suicide. What happens when fake skill meets authentic mastery? Will the bully survive discovering why legends choose anonymity? What happened next would shatter the champion's arrogance for the rest of his pathetic career. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The foggy Tuesday evening wrapped around San Francisco's Chinatown like a familiar embrace as Margaret Flynn pushed through the heavy doors of the Sunset Gardens Community Center. At 72, her silver hair caught the gymnasium's fluorescent lights as she surveyed the modest space that had become her second home. 8 folding chairs arranged in a loose circle, worn foam mats spread across the polished wooden floor, and the gentle hum of conversations in 3 different languages. This was her sanctuary. "Evening, Margaret," called Frank Kowalski, his weathered hands carefully removing his jacket to reveal the ramrod posture that 40 years of retirement hadn't softened. The Korean War veteran's green eyes held their usual alertness as he nodded to the other early arrivals. Rose Patterson hummed a soft melody while arranging her belongings, her floral sweater a splash of color against the gymnasium's institutional beige walls. Margaret checked her watch. 6:25 p.m. 5 minutes until their beloved instructor would begin the evening session with his customary bow and gentle smile. She watched the others settle into their routine. Helen Yamamoto adjusting her glasses, Carl Rodriguez stretching his arthritic fingers, Anna Volkov chatting quietly in accented English about her granddaughter's latest achievement. The side door opened with barely a whisper, and Danny Chun entered as he always did, quietly, respectfully, with the fluid grace of someone half his apparent 60-plus years. Margaret had long since stopped trying to guess his exact age. There was something timeless about their instructor that defied easy categorization. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, his simple black practice clothes immaculate, and his brown eyes held that familiar combination of infinite patience and carefully banked intensity. "Good evening, my friends," Danny said, his voice carrying easily through the space without seeming raised. He moved to the center of their circle, and Margaret noticed, as she always did, how he unconsciously positioned himself with clear sightlines to both exits. Old habits, she supposed, though from what passed she couldn't imagine that Danny began leading them through the opening movements of their Tai Chi form. Margaret felt the day's tensions dissolve. There was something almost supernatural about the way he moved. Perfect balance, precise timing, each gesture flowing into the next like calligraphy written in the air. When he corrected her elbow position with the gentlest touch, she felt the rightness of it immediately, as if her body had been waiting years to understand this simple truth. "Breathe with the movement," Danny reminded them, his own breathing so controlled it seemed effortless. "The form teaches us patience, but patience teaches us strength." Frank's weathered face softened as he worked through the familiar sequence, and Rose's humming harmonized with the rhythm of their movements. This was community, Margaret thought. Not the kind built around shared complaints or common enemies, but the deeper connection forged through shared growth and mutual respect. As they moved through the final sequence, Margaret caught herself studying Danny's hands. Calloused knuckles spoke of decades of training, and there were small scars across his forearms that suggested a more complex history than his gentle demeanor revealed. When their eyes met, he smiled with genuine warmth, but she glimpsed something else, a hyper-awareness that cataloged every sound, every movement, every potential threat to his chosen family of students. The session ended at 7:15 with their traditional bow, and as they began gathering their belongings, Margaret felt the familiar reluctance to leave this peaceful space. Tomorrow felt impossibly far away, and she found herself already anticipating Thursday's class, unaware that their sanctuary was about to be shattered by forces none of them could imagine. The gymnasium doors exploded inward with the theatrical force of a movie entrance, shattering the gentle post-class atmosphere like a brick through stained glass. Margaret nearly dropped her water bottle as Bryce Coleman strutted into their sacred space, his designer tracksuit blazing with sponsor logos and his bleached hair perfectly styled despite the evening fog. At 28, he moved with the fluid arrogance of someone who had never truly been challenged, his 6'3" frame radiating the kind of confidence that came from social media fame and carefully curated victories. Well, 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 Bryce announced to his trailing entourage, his voice pitched for maximum theatrical impact. Look what we have here. Ancient warriors in their natural habitat. Behind him, 3 sycophantic followers juggled professional camera equipment and ring lights, their eager faces glowing with reflected glory. Rick Hendricks, his 35-year-old manager, sported the kind of artificial tan that screamed expensive grooming, while cameraman Joey Martinez adjusted settings with the practiced efficiency of someone documenting every moment of his meal. Ticket's life. Margaret felt Frank stiffen beside her as Bryce began his performance, speaking directly into the camera with the polished delivery of a practiced entertainer. Welcome back to my channel, Champions. I'm here scouting locations for the new season of Respect the Champion, where we separate the real martial artists from the weekend warriors playing dress-up. Ashley Brooks, barely 24 and drowning in designer accessories, giggled at her employer's scripted wit while live-streaming everything to his million-plus followers. The comments were already flooding in, laughing emojis, flame symbols, and encouragements for Bryce to show these old-timers what real fighting looks like. Rose Patterson clutched her sweater tighter around her small frame, and Margaret noticed Helen Yamamoto taking an unconscious step backward. The sudden invasion of their peaceful space felt like violation, the harsh artificial lighting and crude laughter poisoning the sanctuary they had carefully cultivated over months of shared practice. Danny approached the group with his customary calm, but Margaret caught the subtle shift in his posture, a coiling of energy that reminded her of a documentary she'd once seen about apex predators. "Excuse me," Danny said politely, his voice maintaining its usual gentle tone despite the chaos erupting around them. "The center is closing for the evening. Perhaps you could return during regular business hours?" Bryce turned toward Danny with exaggerated surprise, as if noticing him for the first time. "Oh, look, the sensei himself." He gestured broadly for his cameras, his bleached smile revealing expensive dental work. "Tell me, Grandpa, how long have you been teaching these museum pieces to play pretend kung fu? Did you learn from fortune cookies or just old Bruce Lee movies?" The cruel laughter from his followers cut through the gymnasium like broken glass. Margaret felt her protective instincts flare as she watched Frank's jaw tighten and Rose's eyes fill with hurt confusion. This wasn't just rudeness. It was predatory behavior, the kind of systematic humiliation that marked genuine bullies. Danny's stillness became profound, not the stillness of fear, but something far more dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice carried a quality Margaret had never heard before. Infinite patience stretched over steel. "These people deserve your respect. They're learning, growing, supporting each other. That's what real martial arts teaches." "Real martial arts?" Bryce's voice climbed to a mocking falsetto. "This is real martial arts." He launched into an elaborate series of kicks and punches inches from Danny's face, his movements technically impressive but laden with theatrical flourish designed more for camera impact than practical application. "Olympic-level Taekwondo? Old man, not whatever ancient history you're peddling to these poor folks." Margaret watched Danny absorb the display without flinching, his brown eyes tracking every movement with the kind of analytical precision that suggested extensive experience reading opponents. When Bryce finished his demonstration with arms spread wide for applause, Danny simply nodded once. "Very impressive," Danny said quietly. But impressive techniques mean nothing without wisdom to guide them. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Margaret felt the atmosphere shift towards something infinitely more dangerous. Bryce's expression shifted from theatrical arrogance to genuine malice as Danny's quiet words struck home. The cameras kept rolling, but the pretense of entertainment vanished as something darker took control of the young fighter's features. He stalked toward the carefully arranged practice equipment with predatory intent, his designer sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Ancient history is right, Bryce snarled, and drove his foot into the wooden training post with vicious force. The crash echoed through the gymnasium like gunfire as the carefully balanced dummy toppled and skittered across the floor, taking 3 foam mats with it. Rose Patterson's gasp cut through the air, and Margaret felt her heart rate spike as she watched months of patient arrangement destroyed in seconds. "Son, that's enough." Frank Kowalski's voice carried the unmistakable authority of a man who had faced down enemies in 2 wars, his weathered frame straightening to its full military bearing despite his 78 years. The Korean War veteran stepped forward. With the kind of courage that had earned him 3 combat decorations, his green eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Enough." Bryce wheeled around, his social media mask finally slipping completely. "I haven't even started, you old fossil." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Bryce planted both hands against Frank's chest and shoved with the full force of his athletic frame, sending the elderly veteran stumbling backward. Frank's arthritic knees buckled, and he hit the polished floor hard, his hip striking the wood with a sickening thud that made everyone in the room wince. Rose screamed, a high, terrified sound that had no place in their peaceful sanctuary. Margaret rushed to Frank's side, her librarian's instincts warring with a fury she hadn't felt since her husband's funeral. The proud veteran's face had gone pale, not from the pain, but from the humiliation of being knocked down by someone young enough to be his grandson. Frank, are you hurt?" Margaret's hands shook as she helped assess the damage, her mind cataloging potential injuries with the practical efficiency that had guided her through 45 years of helping people solve problems. Behind her, she heard Helen Yamamoto's rapid breathing and Anna Volkov's soft prayers in Russian, but Bryce wasn't finished. Feeding off the terror he'd created, he moved into an exaggerated fighting stance and began throwing theatrical kicks inches from Margaret's silver hair. Each movement forced her to flinch and back away, her dignity crumbling under the assault of manufactured fear. Pathetic old-timers playing dress-up. Bryce's voice had climbed to a vicious shriek as his camera crew captured every moment of the elderly woman's distress. Wannabe warriors who wouldn't last 5 seconds in a real fight. "Maybe I should give you all a private lesson right now." Danny materialized beside Frank with liquid grace, his gentle hands moving over the veteran's injuries with the practiced efficiency of someone with extensive medical training. Margaret watched him check Frank's pulse, test his joints, examine his pupils, all while his face remained a mask of professional calm. "Can you stand?" Danny asked quietly, and Frank nodded grimly, accepting Danny's assistance with the grudging acceptance of a proud man who recognized genuine help. As the elderly veteran regained his feet, Margaret caught something she had never seen before in their instructor's expression, a subtle hardening around his brown eyes, like storm clouds gathering on a previously clear horizon. Danny turned to face Bryce with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed, each step measured and precise. The young fighter was still performing for his cameras, throwing elaborate combinations at imaginary opponents while his followers laughed and encouraged his cruelty. "You need to leave," Danny said, his voice carrying a quality Margaret had never heard before, not raised, not threatening, but somehow infinitely more dangerous than either. Now, Bryce spun around with theatrical surprise, as if he'd forgotten the quiet instructor existed. But when their eyes met, something passed between them. Predator recognizing predator, perhaps, or the moment when a true martial artist finally revealed the steel beneath silk. For just an instant, Bryce seemed to falter, taking an unconscious half-step backward, as if his body recognized a threat his mind couldn't process. Then his arrogance reasserted itself, and he moved closer to Danny with the swaggering confidence of someone who had built his entire identity on physical dominance. Make me, Grandpa, Bryce whispered, close enough that the cameras couldn't catch his words. I dare you. Danny's stillness became absolute as Bryce invaded his personal space. The young fighter's bleached hair and expensive cologne a stark contrast to the older man's understated presence. Margaret watched from beside Frank, who was now standing, steadily but favoring his right hip, and she felt the atmosphere in the gymnasium shift like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Please leave, Danny repeated, his voice maintaining its characteristic gentleness despite the electricity crackling in the air around him. These people have done nothing to deserve your disrespect. They're here to learn, to grow, to support each other. That's what community means. Bryce laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the gymnasium walls as his manager Rick moved closer with the professional camera, hungry for content that would generate clicks and controversy. Community? This isn't community, old man. This is a nursing home with delusions. And you? He poked Danny's chest with his index finger, the gesture casual and dismissive. You're just another has been teaching fairy tales to people too old to know better. Margaret noticed that Danny didn't even flinch when Bryce touched him, but something profound changed in his posture. Not aggressive, but suddenly present in a way that made the air itself seem heavier. Frank recognized it too. She saw the veterans. Eyes widened slightly as military instincts identified the unmistakable aura of someone who had seen real violence and emerged victorious. Last chance, Danny said quietly, and Margaret felt a chill run down her spine at the controlled precision. In those two words. Or what? Bryce spread his arms wide, playing to his cameras with renewed theatricality. You'll bore me to death with ancient philosophy? Show me some moves you learned from a fortune cookie? Please, sensei. He drew out the title mockingly. Enlighten us with your vast wisdom. The young fighter launched into another display of high kicks and spinning techniques, his movements technically proficient but laden with the kind of showy excess that prioritized spectacle over substance. His followers cheered and recorded, treating the gymnasium like their personal stage while 8 elderly people clustered together in growing fear. When Bryce finished his performance with a theatrical bow, Danny simply stood watching him with the patience of someone who had seen it all before. The contrast was striking. Youth and arrogance versus age and restraint. Social media flash against traditional discipline. Very impressive, Danny said finally, his voice carrying no trace of mockery despite Bryce's cruel demonstration. But martial arts without respect is just violence waiting for an excuse. Respect. Bryce's voice climbed toward hysteria as he sensed his audience growing restless. I'll show you respect. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. He gestured broadly at his camera crew, his million-plus followers watching the live stream. The terrified seniors pressed against the gymnasium walls. One fight, old man. You and me. When I'm done with you, maybe these poor folks will understand the difference between real martial arts and whatever nostalgic nonsense you've been feeding them. Danny closed his eyes for a long moment, and Margaret could see him weighing options. With the careful deliberation of someone who understood that violence, once unleashed, created consequences far beyond the immediate moment. When he opened them again, his gaze held a sadness that spoke of hard-earned wisdom about the price of conflict. If you insist on this path, Danny said finally, we'll do it properly. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, in the main hall. But we follow traditional rules, proper respect before and after, whatever the outcome. Bryce's eyes lit up with predatory excitement. This was better than he'd dared hope. Not just a viral moment, but content for weeks of promotion. Traditional rules? Perfect. And let's make it interesting. When I win, not if, when this joke of a martial arts program shuts down permanently, and you pay me $10,000 for the educational experience. His grin turned vicious. But hey, if you somehow manage to surprise me, I'll publicly apologize and donate $50,000 to your little community center. Fair enough. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. $10,000 would bankrupt the center, but $50,000 would fund it for years. The wager was designed to be irresistible and impossible to win. Danny nodded once, accepting terms that seemed to seal his doom. 7 o'clock tomorrow. Be ready. As Bryce and his entourage finally departed, flooding the quiet evening with their harsh laughter and camera flashes, Margaret helped Frank toward the exit while her mind raced with implications. She had watched Danny teach for 2 years, seen his incredible grace and evident expertise, but this felt different, bigger and more dangerous than anything their gentle instructor had prepared them for. Tomorrow evening, she realized with growing dread, they would discover whether their beloved teacher was truly the master his movements suggested, or simply a kind man about to face the brutal reality of youth and arrogance backed by genuine athletic skill. The fog seemed thicker as they stepped outside, and Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking towards something that would change their small community forever. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made San Francisco's hills shimmer like distant promises. But Margaret Flynn felt anything but clear as she pushed through the door of Eddie Matsumoto's electronics shop at precisely 9 o'clock. The familiar smell of solder and old circuit boards couldn't calm her racing thoughts about the confrontation looming over their community like a gathering storm. Margaret, Frank, Rose. Eddie looked up from a vintage radio he was repairing, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the morning light streaming through windows crowded with decades of accumulated electronic treasures. At 67, Eddie moved with the precise economy of someone who had spent a lifetime working with delicate components. But this morning his usual calm efficiency seemed strained. Frank Kowalski entered behind Margaret, moving more stiffly than usual after his humiliating fall the previous evening. The Korean War veteran's pride had taken more damage than his hip, and the careful way he lowered himself into Eddie's worn leather chair spoke volumes about the night he'd endured. Rose Patterson arrived last, her usual cheerful humming replaced by worried silence as she clutched a thermos of coffee like a lifeline. "I've been thinking about last night," Eddie said without preamble, settling behind his cluttered workbench where ancient tube radios shared space with cutting-edge surveillance equipment. "That young man, Bryce, he's not just some random bully. Someone that confident, that prepared with cameras and legal wagers. This feels orchestrated." Margaret accepted the coffee Eddie offered, grateful for the warmth against her trembling hands. "What do we really know about Danny?" she asked, voicing the question that had kept her awake until dawn. "I mean, really know? Where he lives, what he did before coming here, even if Danny-chan is his real name." The four friends exchanged troubled glances as they realized how little concrete information they possessed about the man they'd trusted with their physical and emotional well-being for 2 years. Eddie had been present when Danny first appeared, asking quietly about renting space for martial arts instruction, paying 6 months in advance with crisp cash that suggested either careful planning or significant resources. "He never talks about family," Rose observed softly, her teacher's instincts recognizing someone who deflected personal questions with practiced skill. "No photos, no stories about children or grandchildren. And the way he moves, I taught elementary school for 40 years, and I know the difference between someone who learned martial arts for exercise and someone who what?" Frank's military experience had taught him to read people quickly, and he'd noticed details the others might have missed. "The way he checked my injuries last night, that wasn't first aid training. That was field medicine. Professional level." Eddie pulled out his laptop, a sleek device that seemed incongruous among the vintage electronics surrounding them. "I've been searching online since dawn. Danny Chen, martial arts instructor, returns hundreds of results, but nothing matches our Danny's physical description or background. It's like he appeared from nowhere 2 years ago." Margaret studied the search results over Eddie's shoulder, her librarian's training automatically categorizing and cross-referencing information. Dozens of Danny Chins practiced martial arts across California, but none bore even passing resemblance to their instructor. Their Danny seemed to exist only in the present tense, without digital footprints or documented history. "Maybe that's intentional," Frank suggested, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood operational security. "People with certain backgrounds sometimes need to disappear from their old lives. Military, intelligence, law enforcement, hell, witness protection." Eddie's fingers hesitated over the keyboard as he prepared to expand his search parameters. Something in his expression suggested he'd already found information he wasn't ready to share, but Margaret's sharp eyes caught the flicker of recognition that crossed his weathered features. "There is something," Eddie admitted reluctantly, turning the laptop screen away from them. "But maybe we should respect Danny's privacy. If he wanted us to know his background, He would have told us. Rose leaned forward, her gentle demeanor hiding the steel core that had sustained 4 decades of teaching. Eddie, our friend, is about to fight someone half his age in front of cameras that will broadcast his defeat to millions of people. Don't. You think we should know if we're watching a lamb go to slaughter? Eddie's internal struggle played out across his expressive face before he slowly rotated the laptop back toward them. I think, he said quietly, you're going to want to see this. By 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, word of the challenge had spread through Chinatown's interconnected network of shops, restaurants, and community centers like ripples across a still pond. Margaret stood outside the Golden Dragon restaurant, watching as Mrs. Chun, no relation to Danny, despite the shared surname, emerged with a worried expression to ask about our teacher's trouble with that young fighter. The concern was genuine and widespread. Danny had become a quiet fixture in the neighborhood over his 2 years of residence. Never intrusive, but always helpful. Carrying groceries for elderly neighbors. Offering gentle corrections to children practicing forms in the park. Mediating disputes with the patient wisdom that marked genuine masters. Now their protector faced humiliation or worse, and the community felt the vulnerability of losing someone who had become essential to their sense of safety. At 4 o'clock, the peace of Sunset Gardens Community Center was shattered again as 3 black SUVs disgorged Bryce Coleman and a production crew that had expanded overnight into a full-scale media operation. Professional lighting equipment, multiple camera angles, and sound technicians transformed the modest gymnasium into a television studio designed to capture every moment of Danny's anticipated defeat. Bryce himself had undergone a transformation that spoke of serious preparation and financial backing. Gone was the previous evening's casual tracksuit, replaced by custom fighting gear that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His bleached hair had been professionally styled, and his movements carried the fluid confidence of someone who had spent the morning in intensive training, preparing combinations specifically designed to overwhelm and humiliate an older opponent. Margaret watched through the center's windows as Rick Hendricks coordinated with what appeared to be actual television producers, their expensive equipment and professional demeanor suggesting this event had attracted attention far beyond Bryce's usual social media audience. The young fighter was performing for the cameras, shadowboxing, and delivering sound bites about teaching respect to wannabe masters and separating real martial artists from community center pretenders. Unknown to the gathering crowd, Vincent Kane sat in his silver Mercedes S-Class across the street, his cold gray eyes, cataloging every face, every reaction, every potential vulnerability in the community's response to this crisis. At 52, Kane had built his fortune by recognizing opportunity in other people's disasters, and tonight's spectacle represented the perfect storm of circumstances he needed to advance his long-term plans for the neighborhood. Detective Rita Valdez occupied the passenger seat, her police credentials providing cover for surveillance that would be illegal for civilian investigators. She photographed license plates, documented faces, and made notes about community leaders who might prove resistant to Kane's future development proposals. The martial arts challenge was merely theater, the real intelligence gathering focused on identifying pressure points that could be exploited later. The old man won't last 2 minutes, Valdez observed, watching Bryce's warm-up routine through telephoto lenses. Coleman's got 40 pounds, 20 years, and professional training advantages. This isn't going to be a fight, it's going to be a beating. Kane's smile held no warmth as he considered the evening's potential outcomes. If Danny suffered public humiliation, the community would lose faith in their protector and become more susceptible to outside pressure. If Danny somehow prevailed, the viral attention would attract scrutiny that could force him to abandon his anonymous life and leave the neighborhood vulnerable. Either result served Kane's purposes perfectly. At 5:30, Danny arrived at the community center carrying a small canvas bag and wearing the same simple black practice clothes that had become his signature. He moved through the growing crowd with his characteristic calm, acknowledging supporters with gentle nods while maintaining the focused composure of someone preparing for significant challenge. Margaret noticed he spent extra time checking the gymnasium's exits and sight lines, his movements suggesting the systematic reconnaissance of someone with extensive tactical training. When their eyes met through the window, he offered her a reassuring smile that somehow made her more worried rather than less. The sun was setting behind San Francisco's hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed ominous rather than beautiful, as if nature itself was warning of the violence to come. At 6 o'clock, Margaret sat alone in the community center's cramped office, Eddie's laptop humming quietly on the desk before her. The password he'd reluctantly shared, Bushido 1947, had unlocked more than just his computer. It had opened a window into secrets that explained everything and nothing about their beloved instructor. Her hands trembled as she typed Donnie martial arts into the search engine, then expanded her parameters when the initial results yielded nothing. Martial arts instructor San Francisco brought hundreds of hits, but none matching their Donnie's description or teaching style. At 6:30, inspiration struck. She tried Donnie Yen martial arts champion, and the screen exploded with information that made her breath catch in her throat. Wikipedia page. Tournament records. Film career. 6-time world karate champion. The photograph was unmistakably there. Donnie, though taken perhaps 15 years earlier. The same gentle eyes, the same precise posture, but wearing formal competition attire and holding golden trophies that spoke of achievements far beyond anything she'd imagined. Margaret read frantically. Innovative fighting techniques, legendary precision, reputation for honor and restraint. The man who patiently corrected her elbow positioning was apparently one of the most respected martial artists in the world, hiding in plain sight among senior citizens who thought they were learning gentle exercise routines. At 6:45. Eddie, Frank, and Rose arrived to find Margaret staring at the screen in stunned silence. "My God," she whispered, "we've been learning from a legend." The revelation changed everything about tomorrow's confrontation and raised terrifying questions about why Donnie Yen was living anonymously in their small community. It's exactly 7 o'clock. The Sunset Gardens Community Center's main hall buzzed with over 60 spectators despite Donnie's preference for privacy. Margaret clutched her purse tighter as she recognized faces from other martial arts schools, curious neighbors, and Bryce's growing social media following who had ignored the no cameras agreement and were live streaming on phones held at hip level. Bryce entered like a conquering gladiator, his custom gear gleaming under the harsh television lights his crew had installed without permission. He shadowboxed for the cameras, his high kicks and spinning techniques drawing cheers from supporters who treated this like entertainment rather than the serious confrontation it had become. Donnie appeared through the side door as quietly as always, his simple black practice clothes making him seem smaller and older beside Bryce's theatrical presence. The contrast was stark. Youth versus age, flash versus substance, social media spectacle against traditional discipline. Margaret, Frank, Rose, and Eddie watched from the front row, their secret knowledge making Donnie's calm preparation seem almost supernatural. While Bryce posed and postured, Donnie performed a traditional bow to the four directions, honoring the space and the art itself with reverence that spoke of genuine mastery. The fight began with Bryce's explosive assault, high kicks, spinning techniques, and combinations designed to overwhelm through sheer athletic fury. For 30 seconds, he threw everything he possessed while Donnie simply wasn't there, moving like water around attacks that passed through empty air. Then Donnie responded with 3 movements, so precise they seemed choreographed: redirected momentum, pressure point precision, and surgical striking that dropped Bryce unconscious in under 2 minutes. The crowd erupted in stunned amazement as their humble instructor helped his opponent to his feet with respectful dignity. The explosion of amazement that followed Donnie's impossible victory felt surreal to Margaret as she watched their humble instructor calmly collect scattered practice equipment as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Around them, spectators erupted in excited conversations. Cell phones captured every angle of Bryce Coleman's dazed recovery, and the gymnasium buzzed with the electric energy that follows witnessing the impossible made manifest. Frank Kowalski's weathered face beamed with vindicated pride as he helped steady Rose Patterson, whose gentle clapping had tears streaming down her cheeks. Eddie Matsumoto stood quietly beside them, his expression mixing satisfaction with growing concern as he watched the crowd's reaction escalate beyond anything their peaceful community had experienced. "That was incredible," shouted a young marshal. artist from another school, pushing through the crowd toward Danny with eager questions about technique and training. How did you move like that? What style was that combination? Are you taking new students? But Danny deflected the attention with his characteristic gentle persistence, gathering foam mats and practice weapons while offering only modest responses about everyone having something to learn and something to teach. Margaret noticed his repeated glances at his phone and the way his eyes systematically cataloged faces in the crowd, behavior she now recognized as professional surveillance awareness rather than simple social discomfort. Bryce sat in a corner chair, slowly recovering. His breath and his shattered confidence under his manager Rick's increasingly frantic ministrations. The young fighter's earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire self-image had been destroyed in under 2 minutes. His camera crew continued recording, but their excitement had shifted from documenting expected victory to capturing viral content that would define Bryce's career in ways he never intended. By 8 o'clock, most spectators had departed, but the digital aftermath was just beginning. Eddie showed Danny his phone screen, where footage of the fight was already spreading across social media platforms with titles like Mystery Martial Arts Master Destroys Cocky Champion and Old Man Delivers Instant Karma to Arrogant Fighter. Margaret watched Danny's expression darken as he scrolled through the rapidly multiplying videos, each post generating thousands of views and hundreds of comments speculating about his identity and background. The viral nature of modern communication meant their quiet instructor's face was being broadcast to millions of viewers within hours of his reluctant public display. This kind of attention brings complications, Danny murmured, his voice carrying undertones of genuine concern that made Margaret's protective instincts flare. She thought about the Wikipedia page, the legendary tournament record, the carefully constructed anonymity he'd maintained for 2 years, all potentially shattered by a single evening's viral exposure. What kind of complications? Frank asked, his military instincts recognizing someone with operational concerns beyond simple privacy preferences. Danny was quiet for a long moment, studying the empty gymnasium where their peaceful sanctuary had been transformed into a public spectacle. Some people prefer to remain invisible for good reasons, he said finally. When legends become visible again, they attract attention from those who remember old debts, old conflicts, old enemies. Rose reached out to pat Danny's arm with maternal concern. We'll support you however we can. This is our community, our family. But as they locked up the community center at 8:30, Margaret noticed Danny lingering in the doorway, his eyes scanning the street with the methodical attention of someone checking for threats. His body language suggested a man memorizing details he might not see again, and she realized with growing dread that their victory might have cost them more than defeat ever could. Outside, Vincent Kane's silver Mercedes idled across the street, its tinted windows concealing 2 figures who had watched the evening's events with very different reactions than the celebrating crowd. The real game was just beginning, and Danny's legendary skills had painted a target on their entire community. Thursday morning's fog clung to the windows of Vincent Kane's 40-story office like a shroud as the real estate developer reviewed overnight intelligence reports with the cold efficiency that had built his criminal empire. At 52, Kane possessed the kind of predatory patience that allowed him to wait months for the perfect opportunity to destroy communities that stood between him and profit, and last night's viral spectacle had provided exactly the opening he needed. Detective Rita Valdez sat across from Kane's mahogany desk, her police credentials providing perfect cover for activities that would have landed civilian investigators in federal prison. She spread photographs and documents across the polished surface with the practiced efficiency of someone who had corrupted her oath so thoroughly that evidence tampering felt like routine paperwork. Donnie Yen, Valdez announced, sliding a printed Wikipedia page toward Kane. 6-time world karate champion, legendary martial artist, film star worth an estimated $20 million. Our humble community center instructor has been playing a very deep game. Kane studied the information with growing satisfaction, his cold gray eyes processing implications that would have escaped less calculating minds. Legendary figures possessed exploitable weaknesses that ordinary people lacked. Their reputations made them predictable. Their honor codes created tactical vulnerabilities. and their protective instincts toward innocent people provided perfect leverage for sophisticated manipulation. "This is better than I dared hope," Kane murmured, already formulating strategies that would transform Danny's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. A man of his stature can't simply disappear when legal troubles arise. Too much attention, too many questions from media and law enforcement agencies worldwide. At 10 o'clock, Kane's intercom announced the arrival of his most important visitor. Bryce Coleman entered the conference room like a broken man, his usual theatrical confidence, replaced by shell-shocked humiliation that made him perfect for Kane's purposes. The young fighter's social media empire was crumbling as overnight mockery replaced his carefully cultivated image of invincibility, and his corporate sponsors were already distancing themselves from association with viral failure. "Mr. Coleman." Kane's voice carried just the right mixture of sympathy and opportunity. "I understand last night was educational. Perhaps we can help each other recover from this unfortunate situation." Kane's proposal was elegantly simple in its cruelty. $100,000 in exchange for helping destroy Donnie Yin's reputation and force the community center to close permanently. The martial arts legend's honor code made him predictable. He would never abandon his students, never flee when innocent people faced consequences for his actions, never compromise his principles even when tactical retreat offered personal safety. "Think about it," Kane continued, sliding a cashier's check across the polished table. "Your humiliation becomes the foundation for criminal assault charges. Yin's hands are registered as deadly weapons under California law when you file police reports claiming unprovoked attack. He faces felony charges that will destroy his legendary reputation and send him to prison for years." Bryce stared at the check, his wounded pride warring with residual respect for Danny's obvious skill and restraint. The fight had lasted under 2 minutes, but those precise movements had demonstrated control that spoke of genuine mastery rather than malicious intent. "He could have really hurt me," Bryce admitted reluctantly. "Those pressure points, that timing. He was holding back, showing mercy." Kane's smile held no warmth as he played on the young man's shattered ego and desperate financial situation. His sponsors were fleeing, his social media following was mocking him mercilessly, and his Olympic dreams had evaporated in a cloud of viral humiliation that would follow him for years. "Mercy." Kane's voice dripped with calculated poison. "He humiliated you in front of millions of people. He destroyed your career, your reputation, your future. And now he's probably laughing about it with his elderly students, treating you like a joke he shared with friends." By 11 o'clock, Detective Valdez was drafting arrest warrants based on Bryce's revised account of events, describing Danny as a dangerous individual who had assaulted a young athlete without provocation, using his deadly skills to commit felony assault that demanded immediate prosecution. Kane stared out his windows at Chinatown below, imagining glass towers rising where century-old communities currently flourished, built on the foundation of one legendary man's downfall. Thursday afternoon's gentle sunlight filtered through the Sunset Gardens Community Center's windows as Margaret, Frank, Rose, and Eddie arrived for their regular 2:30 gathering. The peaceful normalcy of their routine feeling surreal after the previous night's extraordinary events. They found Danny arranging practice equipment with his usual methodical precision, but Margaret noticed the subtle changes in his behavior. The way he paused to listen for sounds from the street, the careful positioning that kept him within sight of both exits, the hyper-awareness that spoke of someone expecting trouble. The viral videos had continued spreading overnight, accumulating millions of views and transforming their humble instructor into an internet sensation whether he wanted the attention or not. Eddie's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as clips of the fight appeared on every major social media platform, accompanied by speculation about Danny's identity and increasingly accurate guesses about his legendary background at AT precisely. 2:30, Margaret approached Danny directly, her librarian's courage overcoming her natural respect for his privacy. "We know who you are," she said gently, watching his shoulders tense despite his continued focus on arranging foam mats. "Donnie Yen, 6-time world karate champion. We're honored to have learned from you, and we want you to know that your secret is safe with us." Danny stopped arranging equipment and sat heavily on a wooden bench, suddenly looking every one of his 61 years. The mask of gentle anonymity he'd maintained for 2 years cracked, revealing the weight of carrying a legendary reputation while trying to live a normal life among people he'd grown to love as family. "I came to San Francisco to disappear," Danny admitted, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of running from complications that extended far beyond simple privacy concerns. "2 years ago, I was tired of being Donnie Yen, tired of the expectations, the challenges, the enemies that fame creates in the martial arts world. I wanted to teach beginners, to help elderly people maintain their health and dignity, to be useful without being famous." Frank leaned forward with military understanding of operational security concerns. "What kind of enemies?" "The kind that see legendary reputations as challenges to overcome," Danny replied, his brown eyes holding memories of conflicts that had nothing to do with tournament victories or film careers. "Criminal organizations that want to recruit famous fighters for illegal competitions, rival schools that send students to prove themselves by defeating recognized masters, government agencies that remember old favors and expect continuing cooperation." At 3 o'clock, their conversation was interrupted by loud, authoritative knocking that made everyone in the room tense. Detective Rita Valdez entered with 2 uniformed officers, her professional demeanor barely concealing satisfaction as she approached Danny with arrest warrant in hand. "Donnie Yen," Valdez announced, her voice carrying throughout the suddenly silent gymnasium. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Margaret watched in horror as handcuffs clicked around Danny's wrists, the sound echoing like gunshots in their peaceful sanctuary. The legendary martial artist didn't resist, maintaining his characteristic dignity even as his students' shocked protests filled the air around him. "This is insane." Frank's military bearing couldn't contain his outrage. That young man challenged him. There were 60 witnesses. According to Mr. Coleman's revised statement, Valdez replied with bureaucratic indifference. This was an unprovoked assault by an individual whose hands constitute deadly weapons under California law. The fight was recorded, the injuries documented, and the charges are serious. As the police car disappeared down the street with their beloved teacher in the back seat, Margaret noticed Vincent Kane's silver Mercedes parked across from the community center. Through tinted windows, she glimpsed the developer's cold smile, the expression of a predator who had successfully separated the herd from its protector. "This isn't over," Margaret whispered, her fury growing as she realized they were witnessing not justice, but the opening move in a much larger and more dangerous game. Thursday evening arrived with the oppressive weight of impending doom as Margaret, Frank, Rose, and Eddie gathered in the Sunset Gardens Community Center's main hall at 6 o'clock, the space feeling hollow and vulnerable without Danny's protective presence. Other regular attendees trickled in for the scheduled class. Helen Yamamoto clutching her purse like a shield, Carl Rodriguez moving with the careful steps of someone who sensed danger, and Anna Volkov crossing herself repeatedly while muttering prayers in Russian. Margaret had spent the afternoon coordinating with community legal aid clinics, only to discover that Danny's bail had been set at $50,000, exactly the amount Bryce had mockingly offered to donate if he lost the fight. The coincidence felt too precise to be accidental. Another piece of evidence that their community was being systematically dismantled by forces with resources and planning far beyond simple revenge. At 6:30, their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of 3 lawyers in expensive suits, led by senior partner Jonathan Pierce, whose predatory smile and perfectly styled silver hair screamed corporate intimidation. They served the community center with a thick stack of legal documents that Margaret's trembling hands could barely hold steady as she tried to process the devastating implications. "Fire code violations," Pierce announced with barely concealed satisfaction, his voice echoing through the gymnasium like a death sentence. "Structural deficiencies that pose immediate danger to public safety. Permit discrepancies that invalidate your occupancy license. Health department infractions that require immediate remediation." Eddie's electronics expertise proved valuable, as he quickly identified sophisticated listening devices that had been planted throughout the building overnight, tiny transmitters hidden in light fixtures, behind picture frames, and under practice equipment. Someone had been monitoring their every conversation, using their own words to stay one step ahead of any resistance they might organize. These violations require immediate compliance, Pierce continued, his legal team filming everything for documentation that would be used against them in court. 72 hours to complete renovations estimated at over $200,000, or face permanent closure and criminal charges for operating an unsafe public facility. Frank's military instincts kicked in as he began organizing security measures, treating their situation like the tactical emergency it had become. He positioned lookouts, established communication protocols, and created escape routes while his mind cataloged the systematic nature of their persecution. This wasn't random harassment. It was a coordinated assault designed to destroy their community's foundation. T7 o'clock. Rose emerged from the community center's small kitchen with devastating news about Danny's legal situation. The charges against him were serious enough to require federal intervention if his martial arts background was deemed relevant to Homeland Security concerns. His legendary status, which they'd hoped would provide protection, had instead made him a target for prosecution seeking high-profile convictions. "They're going to make an example of him," Rose said softly, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by the steel core that had sustained 40 years of teaching difficult children. "Show the world that even legends can be brought down by American justice when they step out of line." Margaret coordinated with other Chinatown community leaders throughout the evening, discovering that their situation wasn't unique. 7 other community centers had faced identical legal harassment over the past 18 months, all following the same pattern of manufactured violations and impossible compliance deadlines. The centers that had fought back were now empty lots, awaiting luxury development, while those that surrendered quietly had been demolished within weeks of closure. At BY9 o'clock, they realized they were fighting a war on multiple fronts, legal, financial, and psychological, against an enemy with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. Danny sat in a jail cell while their community center faced destruction, and Vincent Kane's criminal organization had successfully isolated them from their protector while systematically dismantling the foundation of their resistance. "We need help," Margaret admitted as they locked up their threatened sanctuary. "More help than 4 senior citizens can provide against this level of professional destruction." But as they stepped into the foggy evening, none of them could imagine where such help might come from, or whether it would arrive before their community was scattered to the winds. Friday morning's pale sunlight struggled through the fog as Margaret, Frank, and Rose descended into Eddie Matsumoto's basement at 8 o'clock, their eyes adjusting to reveal a sophisticated intelligence operation that belonged in a government facility rather than beneath a neighborhood electronics shop. Banks of monitors displayed real-time surveillance feeds from across Chinatown, while servers hummed quietly alongside equipment that looked expensive enough to bankrupt small nations. 25 years with the NSA, Eddie explained matter-of-factly, as their shocked expressions registered the scope of his hidden capabilities. Signals intelligence, surveillance technology, counterintelligence operations in Southeast Asia. My retirement to civilian life was actually deep cover for continued domestic monitoring of criminal organizations operating in immigrant communities. Margaret sank into a chair beside a workstation that displayed Vincent Kane's corporate empire in intricate detail: shell companies, offshore accounts, political connections, and a web of corruption that extended throughout San Francisco's government infrastructure. Eddie had been investigating Kane for 8 months, documenting systematic community destruction that followed identical patterns across multiple jurisdictions. Kane's operation isn't just real estate development, Eddie continued, his fingers dancing across keyboards that accessed databases requiring security clearances Margaret didn't know civilians could possess. It's organized crime using luxury construction as money laundering for drug trafficking, human trafficking, and arms dealing. The community centers aren't just valuable property. They're being converted into distribution hubs for criminal enterprises. Frank studied surveillance photographs that showed Kane meeting with known organized crime figures, corrupt police officials, and federal judges whose decisions had consistently favored Kane's legal challenges against community organizations. The veterans' military experience recognized the systematic nature of the corruption, designed to neutralize resistance before communities even realized they were under attack. At T10 o'clock, Eddie revealed the most disturbing intelligence. Kane's network included over 30 compromised officials throughout city government, federal law enforcement, and the judicial system. Detective Valdez was just one piece of a criminal organization that had systematically infiltrated the institutions designed to protect innocent people from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. Danny's arrest wasn't random retaliation, Eddie explained, pulling up documentation that made Margaret's blood run cold. Kane knew Donnie Yin's true identity before Bryce ever entered our community center. The entire confrontation was orchestrated. Kane selected Bryce specifically because his arrogance and social media presence would create the perfect pretext for criminal charges. Rose gasped as Eddie displayed Kane's intelligence files on their community, including detailed profiles of every regular attendee at the martial arts classes. Kane's organization had been monitoring them for months, analyzing weaknesses and relationships that could be exploited to maximize psychological damage when their systematic destruction began. Margaret realized with growing horror that Kane had counted on Danny's honor preventing him from backing down from Bryce's challenge, then used the fight's aftermath to justify legal and physical attacks designed to scatter their community in terror. Every move had been calculated to exploit the legendary martial artist's protective instincts while isolating him from the people he'd sworn to defend. But why target our community specifically? Frank asked, his tactical mind seeking the strategic logic behind Kane's elaborate scheme. That Eddie's expression darkened as he displayed property records and development plans that revealed the ultimate scope of Kane's ambitions. The Sunset Gardens Community Center sits on a corner lot worth $12 million for luxury high-rise development. But more importantly, it's the anchor that holds this neighborhood together. Destroy the center, scatter the community, and Kane can acquire the surrounding properties for fractions of their actual value. By noon, they understood they weren't just fighting for their community center. They were the focal point of a criminal conspiracy designed to destroy Chinatown's cultural identity while generating hundreds of millions in illegal profits. Danny's legendary status had made him the perfect target, his honor ensuring he would fight to protect them, while his fame guaranteed that his destruction would demoralize other communities facing similar threats. "We need federal intervention," Margaret said grimly. "This is beyond anything we can handle alone." Eddie's smile held secrets as dangerous as Kane's corruption. "I've been building a case for months. But federal investigations move slowly, and communities are destroyed in real time. We need to accelerate the timeline." Friday evening settled over the Sunset Gardens Community Center like a funeral shroud as Margaret, Frank, Rose, and Eddie reconvened at 6 o'clock, officially defying Kane's legal intimidation by continuing their activities despite the pending closure order. The gymnasium felt different now, not just their peaceful sanctuary but a fortress under siege, every shadow potentially concealing threats that could materialize without warning. Margaret had spent the day organizing community resistance with a determination that surprised even her, coordinating with shop owners, restaurant managers, and residents who had watched Kane's systematic destruction of other neighborhoods with growing alarm. The response exceeded her hopes. Local businesses pledged financial support, residents volunteered their time, and elderly immigrants who barely spoke English offered their life savings to keep the center operating. By 7 o'clock, their impromptu community meeting had filled the main hall with over 40 people representing the heart of Chinatown's cultural identity. Mrs. Chun from the Golden Dragon restaurant brought homemade dumplings, while Mr. Nakamura from the corner market contributed cases of water and the kind of practical supplies that suggested he understood they were preparing for a prolonged siege rather than a simple protest. "We stand together," announced Helen Yamamoto, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by the steel that had sustained her family through World War II internment camps. "They want to destroy our community, scatter our families, erase our culture for their profit. But we are stronger united than they are with all their money and corruption." Eddie's technical expertise proved invaluable as he discovered that Kane's surveillance operation extended far beyond simple wiretapping. Sophisticated cameras had been installed in street lights, listening devices planted in neighboring businesses, and their personal communications monitored through compromised cell towers that recorded every conversation for analysis by Kane's intelligence network. At 8:30, As the meeting began dispersing and people started heading home through fog-shrouded streets, disaster struck with the sudden violence that marked professional intimidation. Six masked men in dark clothing burst through multiple entrances simultaneously, wielding baseball bats and crowbars with the practiced efficiency of individuals who terrorized communities for profit. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. But the devastation was comprehensive and psychologically calculated. They systematically destroyed practice equipment worth thousands of dollars, smashed windows with deliberate precision, and targeted the elderly attendees with violence designed to maximize fear while avoiding fatalities that would trigger federal investigation. Frank tried to organize resistance, his military training overriding his 78-year-old body's limitations. But age and arthritis proved no match for younger men with weapons and criminal intent. Margaret threw herself over Anna Volkov to shield the terrified widow from a swinging bat, taking a glancing blow to her shoulder that sent lightning bolts of pain down her left arm. Rose Patterson became the attack's most seriously injured victim. When she was knocked down while trying to help Helen Yamamoto escape, her head striking an overturned table with sickening force. The cheerful woman who had hummed during every practice session lay unconscious in a spreading pool of blood while her friends screamed for help and the masked attackers completed their systematic destruction. Eddie documented everything with hidden cameras his attackers hadn't detected, capturing faces and tactical movements that would later prove their connection to Kane's private security team. But in the moment, watching Rose loaded into an ambulance with a severe concussion and broken hip, the evidence felt worthless against the immediate reality of their community's violation. At 9 o'clock, Detective Valdez arrived to investigate, with the kind of perfunctory questions and obvious disinterest that made her corruption unmistakable. She walked through the destroyed gymnasium taking notes that would never be followed up, interviewing witnesses whose statements would disappear into bureaucratic black holes designed to protect the criminals who had hired her as the ambulances. Red lights disappeared into the fog with Rose's still form inside. Margaret stood among the wreckage of their sanctuary and felt something harder than determination crystallizing in her chest. This had moved beyond harassment into warfare, and elderly people with nothing left to lose could be more dangerous than Kane's organization had calculated. Saturday morning found Margaret, Frank, and Eddie maintaining vigil in San Francisco General Hospital's sterile corridors, their eyes red from sleepless hours spent watching Rose Patterson drift in and out of consciousness. At 10 o'clock, the attending physician delivered the devastating financial blow that felt like another calculated attack. Rose's medical bills would likely exceed $50,000, precisely the amount needed for Danny's bail, as if even. Her suffering had been orchestrated to maximize their community's psychological torture. Patricia Wong, the hospital's soft-spoken social worker, quietly informed them that Rose's insurance would cover basic treatment but not the specialized care her traumatic brain injury required. The cheerful woman who had hummed through every martial arts session now lay unconscious, her silver curls stark against white pillows while machines monitored vital signs that fluctuated with terrifying unpredictability. At 11 o'clock, Eddie's secure phone buzzed with intelligence that transformed their understanding of the previous night's attack. His federal contacts had identified the 6 masked assailants as members of Kane's private security team, professional mercenaries who specialized in community intimidation and had terrorized neighborhoods from Seattle to Los Angeles using identical tactics. Detective Valdez has been on Kane's payroll for over 2 years, Eddie revealed, his voice tight with controlled fury, as he displayed financial records showing regular payments from Kane's shell companies to the corrupt police officer. She's been using her badge to harass Kane's targets while suppressing investigations that might expose his criminal network. Margaret absorbed the intelligence with growing rage that felt cleaner and more focused than anything she'd experienced since her husband's death. The systematic nature of Kane's corruption extended beyond simple real estate fraud into organized crime that exploited the very institutions designed to protect vulnerable people from predatory behavior that Frank's military contacts provided the missing piece of Kane's criminal puzzle. The real estate developer wasn't just connected to organized crime. He was a key figure in money laundering operations that stretched across 3 states and involved federal crimes that would normally trigger immediate FBI intervention. The luxury developments were fronts for drug trafficking, human trafficking, and arms dealing that generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits. At 1 o'clock, they visited Danny in his jail cell, finding the legendary martial artist meditating, with serene acceptance that somehow made their situation feel more hopeless rather than less. When they explained Kane's deeper criminal network and Rose's condition, Danny's carefully maintained composure cracked for the first time since his arrest. "Rose was hurt because of me," he said quietly, his brown eyes holding guilt that spoke. Of someone who had spent his life protecting others only to watch his presence bring danger to innocent people. This has to end. No more games. No more strategies that put good people at risk. Margaret recognized the shift in Danny's demeanor. Not despair, but the cold calculation of someone who had made a difficult decision about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. "What are you planning?" "Sometimes the greatest victories require accepting apparent defeat," Danny replied, his voice carrying undertones that suggested he was 3 moves ahead of everyone else in a game whose rules only he fully understood. "Trust me one more time. Kane thinks he's won, but legends don't die easily." As they left the jail, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that Danny was orchestrating something far more complex than simple surrender to overwhelming odds. Saturday afternoon's courtroom felt like a cathedral of corruption as Vincent Kane's legal team presented their case for immediate seizure of the community center property with the polished efficiency of professionals who had performed this ritual destruction dozens of times. Judge Harrison Roberts, whose campaign had received a substantial donation from Kane's shell company the previous month, presided over the proceedings with barely concealed bias that made a mockery of judicial impartiality. T230. The corrupted building inspector took the witness stand, his testimony about dangerous structural violations delivered with the rehearsed precision of someone reading from a script designed to justify predetermined conclusions. Fire Marshal Patricia Hendricks followed with claims about life-threatening safety issues that had somehow escaped detection during 2 years of regular inspections, while Detective Valdez presented Danny's arrest as evidence of ongoing criminal activity on the premises. Margaret watched helplessly from the gallery as their volunteer lawyer, 26-year-old David Park, fought valiantly against Kane's team of expensive attorneys and fabricated evidence. The recent law school graduate's passionate arguments about community rights and procedural justice crashed against the immovable wall of systematic corruption like waves against granite cliffs. At 3:30, Judge Roberts ruled in favor of immediate property seizure with the smug satisfaction of someone whose decision had been purchased months in advance. The community center would be evacuated within 24 hours, all assets held pending criminal investigation, and anyone attempting to resist would face additional charges for interfering with legitimate law enforcement activities. By 4 o'clock, Kane's security team was already changing locks and posting "No trespassing" signs on the building that had served as their community's heart for over a decade. Margaret, Frank, and Eddie stood on the sidewalk like refugees from their own neighborhood, watching through windows as uniformed guards cataloged and removed everything that had made the space theirs. Kane himself supervised the takeover with obvious satisfaction, his cold gray eyes meeting Margaret's through the glass with a smile that promised this was only the beginning of their community's systematic destruction. "Your teacher brought this on you," he had told them earlier. "Heroes only create problems for the people around them." As the fog rolled in with early evening, Margaret felt their defeat settle over her like a shroud, complete and seemingly irreversible. Saturday evening's fog wrapped around San Francisco like a burial shroud as Margaret, Frank, and Eddie stood on the sidewalk outside their former sanctuary, watching Kane's security guards complete their systematic cataloging of a community's dreams. The "No trespassing" sign seemed to mock everything they had built together, while uniformed men with clipboards reduced 2 years of patient growth to inventory numbers on official forms. At 7 o'clock, as the last spectators drifted away, and the reality of their total defeat settled over them like lead weights, Margaret felt her phone buzz with a text from an unknown number. "The strongest tree bends in the wind, but never breaks. Meet me at Rose's hospital room at 8 p.m. Come alone. D." Her hands trembled as she read the message, wondering how Danny could be texting from his jail cell. but something in the carefully chosen words suggested depths to their situation that none of them had understood. She showed the message to Frank and Eddie, watching their expressions shift from confusion to cautious hope as they processed the implications. "How is this possible?" Frank asked, his military mind immediately, cataloging the security protocols that would make cellular communication from jail nearly impossible without official cooperation or sophisticated technical assistance. Eddie's electronics expertise provided the most likely explanation. Federal agents have resources that transcend local law enforcement limitations. If Danny's situation involves national security concerns, his communications could be facilitated through channels that Detective Valdez doesn't control. At 7:30, Margaret walked through San Francisco General's corridors with growing anticipation, her librarian's instincts recognizing the careful coordination required to orchestrate communication from someone supposedly in police custody. The hospital's evening shift created enough chaos to provide cover for activities that wouldn't be possible during normal visiting hours. Rose's room appeared empty when Margaret arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, with only a note on the pillow. Reading gone for tests. Back soon. Nurse Patricia. But as Margaret settled into the bedside chair to wait, Danny stepped out of the bathroom wearing hospital scrubs instead of jail clothes, his appearance so unexpected that she gasped audibly. "How are you here?" Margaret whispered, her mind racing through possibilities that ranged from prison break to elaborate conspiracy involving forces she couldn't identify. That Danny's expression held the calm satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans were finally reaching fruition. "My arrest was real, but my imprisonment was temporary. Federal agents have been building a case against Kane's criminal network for 8 months. And sometimes the best way to protect an undercover operation is to make it appear compromised." The revelation hit Margaret like physical impact as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed suddenly clicked into perfect alignment. Danny's mysterious background, his extensive knowledge of surveillance techniques, his calm acceptance of legal troubles that should have terrified any normal person, all evidence of someone operating under federal protection with resources that transcended local corruption. Undercover operation. Margaret's voice barely carried across the small hospital room. "You mean you've been working with law enforcement this entire time?" At 8:30, FBI agent Patricia Wong entered the room with the professional competence that hospital staff possessed, but her federal credentials transformed the soft-spoken social worker into something infinitely more formidable. She briefed Margaret on the scope of Kane's criminal empire while explaining Danny's real role in San Francisco's Chinatown. "Sometimes legendary martial artists make perfect undercover agents," Agent Wong explained. Danny's reputation provided ideal cover for infiltrating communities that Kane was targeting, while his genuine care for students ensured authentic relationships that criminal organizations couldn't penetrate. Margaret felt the world reshaping itself around revelations that explained everything while raising terrifying new questions about the forces manipulating their community's fate. Their gentle instructor had been a federal agent from the beginning. Their peaceful sanctuary was the center of a major criminal investigation, and their total defeat might actually be the foundation for ultimate victory. "What happens now?" Margaret asked, understanding that Sunday would bring consequences none of them had anticipated. Saturday at 9 p.m. brought revelations that shattered everything Margaret thought she understood about her beloved community as Agent Wong continued her briefing in Rose's hospital room. The woman Margaret had known as a concerned social worker revealed herself as FBI agent Patricia Wong, Danny's federal handler in an operation that had been running for 8 months with resources and scope that boggled the civilian mind. "Frank and Eddie aren't just retired veterans and technicians," Agent Wong explained, her professional demeanor replacing the gentle bedside manner that had seemed so natural. "Frank has been working with military intelligence to track Kane's connections to overseas criminal organizations, while Eddie's electronics shop is actually a fully operational FBI surveillance station that's been monitoring Kane's communications since last winter." Margaret felt the floor shift beneath her as she realized that her amateur detective work with concerned neighbors had actually been a professional intelligence operation with herself as the unknowing civilian asset. The 4 friends who had shared tea and worried conversation were actually highly trained professionals who had chosen to protect her by maintaining the illusion of ordinary retirees concerned about their community. Eddie's NSA background is real, Agent Wong continued, but his retirement was cover for domestic counterintelligence work targeting organized crime in immigrant communities. His basement contains enough evidence to convict Kane's entire organization, while his technical expertise has been documenting financial transactions and criminal communications that will satisfy federal prosecutors. Danny sat quietly during the briefing, but Margaret could see the weight of deception in his posture, the burden of someone who had formed genuine relationships while maintaining a professional cover that required constant vigilance. His care for his students hadn't been performance. It had been the authentic emotion that made undercover work both effective and emotionally devastating. 1830, Agent Wong revealed Frank's true background, retired Army intelligence colonel Francis Kowalski, whose military contacts included active duty personnel in Defense Intelligence Agency and Homeland Security. His veterans organizations were actually intelligence networks that had been coordinating with international law enforcement to shut down Kane's overseas operations simultaneously with domestic arrests. The community center attack wasn't random violence, Agent Wong explained, showing Margaret surveillance footage that captured the assault from multiple angles. Kane's private security team has been under federal surveillance for months, and their systematic intimidation tactics provided crucial evidence of conspiracy and civil rights violations that will support federal racketeering charges. Margaret struggled to process the scope of professional deception that had surrounded her daily life for 2 years. Every conversation, every shared worry, every moment of community building had been observed and documented by federal agents who genuinely cared about the outcome but operated under directives that transcended local concerns. But Rose's injuries are real, Margaret said, her voice breaking as she looked at their friend's still form connected to monitoring equipment. Her pain, her fear, that wasn't part of any operation. Danny's composed facade cracked completely, as guilt and fury warred in his expression. Rose's suffering is the one thing we couldn't control. Kane's willingness to target innocent elderly people proved his criminal organization poses ongoing threats to vulnerable communities nationwide. Her injuries justified federal intervention that would have taken months longer to authorize through normal channels. At 10 o'clock, Agent Wong revealed the operation's scope. Kane's network extended across 7 states and involved federal crimes that would normally trigger immediate FBI action. The delay in arrests had been calculated to gather evidence of the complete criminal conspiracy, but civilian casualties had accelerated the timeline beyond original planning. Your defeat yesterday was strategic, Agent Wong explained. Kane needed to believe he had won completely, that his legal corruption was undetectable and his intimidation tactics were succeeding. Overconfidence makes criminals sloppy, and sloppy criminals provide the evidence federal prosecutors need for life sentences. Margaret realized that Sunday would bring consequences none of them had anticipated, as forces that had been secretly protecting them prepared to emerge from shadows with the full weight of federal law enforcement behind them. The game was larger than any of them had imagined, and Kane's apparent victory was about to become his complete destruction. Sunday morning at 6 o'clock brought the coordinated precision of federal law enforcement as unmarked vans surrounded Vincent Kane's operations across San Francisco with military efficiency. Margaret watched from Eddie's electronics shop, now revealed as a sophisticated FBI surveillance station, as thermal imaging and telephoto lenses tracked simultaneous raids on Kane's downtown office, his Pacific Heights mansion, and the community center he had seized just days earlier. Agent Wong's command center occupied Eddie's basement, with banks of monitors displaying real-time feeds from federal agents equipped with body cameras and tactical communications. The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Over 200 agents coordinating arrests across 4 states, dismantling a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. 8 months of evidence gathering, Agent Wong explained as she coordinated with field teams through encrypted communications. Kane's systematic pattern of community destruction provided federal prosecutors with the racketeering charges needed to justify this level of resource deployment. His arrogance made him predictable. At 7 o'clock, Margaret joined Danny, Frank, and Eddie in the FBI command vehicle parked across from Kane's 40-story office building, sophisticated surveillance equipment providing crystal-clear views. Of the criminal mastermind's arrest during what he had assumed was a routine Sunday brunch with corrupted officials. Kane's shock and rage were visible through telephoto lenses as he realized his entire operation had been infiltrated and documented. Judge Harrison Roberts, Detective Rita Valdez, Fire Marshal Patricia Hendricks. Danny cataloged the simultaneous arrests with satisfaction that mixed professional success with personal vindication. 43 people in federal custody, facing charges that will put them away for decades. The raids on Kane's properties revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Warehouses containing stolen goods worth millions, drug processing facilities disguised as legitimate businesses, and documentation of human trafficking operations that exploited vulnerable immigrant communities throughout the West Coast. At 8 o'clock, Danny revealed the depth of his undercover role to Margaret, explaining how his legendary martial arts reputation had provided perfect cover for federal investigation. Criminals respected strength while underestimating honor, allowing him to infiltrate organizations that would have immediately suspected traditional law enforcement approaches. 5 years of this work, Danny admitted, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had sacrificed personal peace for professional duty. International criminal organizations that exploit vulnerable communities, using my reputation to get close enough to document their operations, while federal agencies built cases that would survive legal challenges. Margaret struggled with the revelation that their gentle instructor had been living a double life of extraordinary complexity, maintaining authentic relationships with his students while gathering evidence that would destroy the criminal network, threatening their community. His patience with elderly beginners hadn't been performance. It had been the genuine emotion that made undercover work both effective and personally sustainable. At 9 o'clock, they visited Rose in her hospital room, finding her awake and alert despite the severity of her injuries. Rose's eyes sparkled with familiar warmth as she revealed her own secret. She had recognized Danny's true identity months earlier but chosen to respect his cover, understanding instinctively that some heroes worked best in shadows. "I taught elementary school for 40 years, Rose said softly, her voice stronger than expected despite the medical equipment surrounding her bed. You learn to recognize when someone is carrying responsibilities they can't discuss. I knew our Danny was protecting us in ways we couldn't see." Margaret felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place as she realized their entire community had been protecting each other through layers of deception and genuine care that transcended professional obligations. Their sanctuary had been real even when built on federal investigation, their friendships authentic despite the circumstances that had brought them together. Kane and his organization are finished, Agent Wong confirmed as updated reports confirmed successful arrests across multiple jurisdictions. Federal charges, state charges, civil rights violations, they'll never threaten another community. The war was over, but Margaret understood that recovery would require rebuilding trust as much as repairing physical damage. Sunday at 11 o'clock found the federal building's sterile conference room transformed into an unlikely setting for redemption as Bryce Coleman sat across from Margaret, Danny, Frank, Eddie, and Agent Wong, preparing to give formal testimony that would complete the federal case against Vincent Kane's criminal conspiracy. The young fighter who had strutted into their community center with such arrogance now appeared genuinely humbled, his designer clothes replaced by simple street attire that suggested someone who had learned painful lessons about authentic versus manufactured strength. "I was everything you thought I was," Bryce began, his voice carrying none of the theatrical projection that had marked his social media persona. "Arrogant, shallow, obsessed with fame and money. When Kane approached me, after my defeat, he played on every weakness I'd spent years cultivating instead of correcting." Margaret studied the young man's transformed demeanor, recognizing the difference between someone performing contrition for tactical advantage and genuine remorse that came from confronting uncomfortable truths about personal character. The viral humiliation that had shattered his carefully constructed image had apparently forced self-examination that years of success had prevented. At noon, Bryce described Kane's sophisticated manipulation with the clarity that came from painful hindsight. The criminal mastermind had identified him through social media monitoring, analyzing his psychological profile to determine exactly how wounded pride and financial desperation could be exploited for maximum effect. Kane knew about Danny's identity. "Before I ever entered your community center," Bryce revealed, his admission confirming Agent Wong's intelligence about the systematic nature of Kane's planning. "He showed me surveillance footage, tournament records, everything. The whole confrontation was orchestrated." Kane counted on Danny's honor preventing him from backing down, then used the fight to justify everything that followed. Danny listened, without visible emotion, but Margaret noticed his hands tighten slightly as Bryce described Kane's cold calculation in exploiting a legendary martial artist's protective instincts. The criminal organization had understood that heroes could be manipulated through their virtues more easily than their weaknesses. AT-1230, Bryce's voice broke as he described the escalation from legal harassment to physical violence, culminating in his horror when Rose was injured during the staged attack on their community center. That moment had shattered his remaining illusions about the game he'd agreed to play. "When I saw her lying there, bleeding and unconscious," Bryce whispered, tears streaming down his face, "I realized I'd helped create something evil. All my anger about being humiliated, it was nothing compared to what we'd done to innocent people who just wanted to learn martial arts and support each other." Margaret felt her protective instincts respond to genuine remorse, understanding that young people could learn from terrible mistakes if given the opportunity for redemption, rather than permanent condemnation. The fighter who had terrorized elderly students was gone, replaced by someone who might become worthy of the second chance he was seeking. "That night, I contacted federal agents," Bryce continued, his testimony providing crucial evidence of Kane's criminal conspiracy. "I wore recording devices to every subsequent meeting, documented the money transfers, gathered evidence of the corruption network that made Kane's operations possible." At 1 o'clock, Danny demonstrated the wisdom that made him legendary by accepting Bryce's apology with genuine grace, recognizing authentic transformation when he encountered it. "Everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes," Danny said quietly. "The question is what you do with the knowledge once you have it." Bryce's request to become Danny's student, not in martial arts techniques, but in character development, marked the completion of his journey from antagonist to ally. Margaret watched the exchange with growing hope that some victories created stronger foundations than simple defeat of enemies. "I want to understand how real strength serves others instead of self," Bryce said earnestly. "I want to become someone worth respecting instead of someone who demands respect through intimidation." The redemption was beginning, but Margaret knew it would require years of consistent choices to prove authentic transformation. Sunday at 3 o'clock brought the desperate violence of cornered predators as Vincent Kane's lieutenant, Victor Nazarov, escaped federal custody during prisoner transport and led 15 heavily armed mercenaries in a final assault on the Sunset Gardens Community Center. The former Spetsnaz operative's scarred face held the cold calculation of someone who understood that destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses represented his organization's last hope of avoiding life imprisonment. Agent Wong's urgent radio calls crackled through the command center as her teams responded to the crisis, but Margaret, Danny, Frank, Eddie, and Bryce were already inside the community center assessing recovery needs when Nazarov's tactical team surrounded the building. With military precision, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through broken windows as the mercenaries cut communications and sealed exits, transforming their former sanctuary into a potential tomb. 15 hostiles, automatic weapons, professional coordination, Frank reported with the clipped efficiency of someone whose military training had prepared him for exactly this scenario. At 78, his arthritic body moved carefully, but his tactical mind remained sharp as he directed defensive positioning while Eddie activated hidden security countermeasures that turned the building's electrical system into a weapon. Danny's transformation from gentle instructor to lethal protector was immediate and absolute as he positioned Margaret in the center's reinforced safe room while calculating angles, distances, and tactical advantages with the precision that had made him legendary. His movements carried a controlled violence that spoke of capabilities far beyond tournament competition or film choreography. At AT-330, The assault began with Nazarov's team breaching multiple entrances simultaneously, their coordinated attack designed to overwhelm through superior firepower and tactical surprise. But they encountered resistance that defied their professional expectations as Danny moved through the familiar environment like liquid death, using every architectural feature to neutralize threats without permanent injury. The legendary martial artist's skills were finally unleashed at full power. Pressure point strikes that instantly disabled armed opponents, redirection techniques that turned attackers' momentum against them, and surgical precision that disarmed gunmen before they could fire a shot. His movement was so fluid it seemed choreographed, but Margaret recognized the deadly efficiency of someone protecting his chosen family with every technique he had mastered over decades of training. Bryce fought beside his former victim with the desperate courage of someone seeking redemption through action, his legitimate martial arts skills finally directed toward protecting others rather than showcasing personal dominance. Frank's military experience proved that age and arthritis couldn't overcome tactical superiority when defending familiar territory, while Eddie's technical expertise turned surveillance cameras and security systems into intelligence networks that provided real-time enemy positions at AT-415. The battle reached its climax as Nazarov himself confronted Danny in the main gymnasium, where their community had first witnessed the legend's true capabilities. The Russian operative's combat training met Danny's lifetime of martial arts mastery in a confrontation that would have been impossible to choreograph, each movement calculated to neutralize without becoming corrupted by hatred or revenge. At Danny's victory was as precise as his character. Nazarov unconscious but unharmed, his weapons disabled, his tactical superiority neutralized through techniques that demonstrated why legends transcended simple physical prowess. The mercenary who had terrorized communities across 3 states lay defeated by someone who fought not for dominance, but for protection of innocent people. At T-445, federal backup arrived to find 15 professional killers unconscious, but alive, systematically defeated by what appeared to be a small group of senior citizens and one reformed young fighter. Margaret stood among the subdued mercenaries, finally understanding that she had witnessed not just martial arts mastery, but the kind of controlled violence that protected civilization from those who would destroy it for profit. The war was truly over. But its aftermath would require rebuilding trust as much as repairing physical damage, creating something stronger from the foundation of shared sacrifice and mutual protection. Sunday at 5 o'clock brought the satisfying conclusion of federal justice as Agent Wong coordinated the arrest of Vincent Kane's remaining criminal network while Margaret, Danny, Frank, Eddie, and Bryce stood in their battle-damaged community center, watching professional mercenaries being loaded into armored transport vehicles. The systematic precision of law enforcement operations felt surreal after the chaotic violence that had transformed their peaceful sanctuary into a battlefield where legends had proven their worth through protective action rather than competitive display. Kane himself arrived in federal custody looking nothing like the polished businessman who had orchestrated months of community destruction through legal intimidation and criminal violence. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, and his cold gray eyes held the desperate fury of someone whose carefully constructed empire had collapsed in a single coordinated operation that revealed the depth of federal infiltration into his organization. 47 arrests across 4 states. Agent Wong reported with professional satisfaction as she briefed media representatives while carefully protecting the identities of civilian participants. Vincent Kane's criminal organization has been completely dismantled, with federal charges including racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit violence against protected communities. At 6 o'clock, Margaret learned that Kane's criminal network had extended far beyond San Francisco, encompassing coordinated community destruction in Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver. His systematic targeting of cultural centers represented a sophisticated money laundering operation that had generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits while destroying the social fabric of immigrant neighborhoods across the West Coast. Detective Rita Valdez, Judge Harrison Roberts, Fire Marshal Patricia Hendricks, and dozens of other corrupted officials faced federal charges that would end their careers and freedom. Their systematic abuse of public trust documented through months of surveillance that Eddie's technical expertise had made possible. The institutional corruption that had enabled Kane's predatory behavior was being surgically removed with the precision that federal prosecutors brought to high-profile cases. That Kane's confrontation with overwhelming evidence broke his remaining composure as he realized that his entire operation had been infiltrated from the beginning. Danny's presence in Chinatown hadn't been coincidental retirement. It had been a federal undercover operation designed to document systematic criminal activity while protecting vulnerable communities from predatory destruction. 5 years of investigation. Agent Wong explained to Kane during his formal processing. International cooperation with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries. Your organization's systematic targeting of immigrant communities triggered federal civil rights investigations that documented patterns of criminal conspiracy spanning multiple jurisdictions. At 7 o'clock, Margaret witnessed Kane's final moment of recognition as he understood that his carefully calculated exploitation of heroic character traits had actually provided federal agents with perfect cover for infiltrating his criminal network. Danny's honor and protective instincts hadn't made him vulnerable. They had made him the ideal undercover operative for dismantling organized crime that preyed on community cohesion. The seized assets from Kane's criminal empire would fund community restoration programs throughout the affected neighborhoods, with the Sunset Gardens Community Center receiving priority treatment as the focal point of the federal investigation. Margaret felt profound satisfaction knowing that Kane's wealth, accumulated through systematic community destruction, would now finance exactly the kind of cultural preservation and mutual support that his organization had tried to eliminate. At 8 o'clock, the last of Kane's mercenaries was transported to federal detention facilities while crime scene investigators documented evidence that would support prosecutions for years to come. The community center showed battle damage from the afternoon's violence, but its structural integrity remained sound, like the community itself, damaged but not broken by criminal assault. Margaret stood beside Danny, Frank, Eddie, and Bryce in the main hall where their journey had begun, understanding that they had witnessed not just the defeat of organized crime, but the triumph of authentic community bonds over systematic attempts to destroy them through fear, corruption, and violence. Justice had been served with the precision that federal law enforcement brought to cases involving systematic civil rights violations and organized criminal conspiracy. 1 month later, October's crisp morning sunlight streamed through the renovated windows of the Sunset Gardens Community Center as hundreds of people gathered for a celebration that felt more like a community resurrection than a simple reopening ceremony. Margaret stood at the entrance, greeting neighbors, city officials, and federal agents who had made this victory possible, her silver hair catching the light as she surveyed facilities that had been transformed from a modest gymnasium into a cultural hub worthy of the legendary figures who had defended it. The renovation, funded entirely by Vincent Kane's seized criminal assets, had expanded the center beyond their original dreams. New practice rooms accommodated multiple martial arts disciplines, a modern kitchen supported community meals, and meeting spaces provided venues for cultural education, legal aid clinics, and the kind of mutual support that made neighborhoods into families. At 10 o'clock, Rose Patterson returned for her first class since the attack, moving carefully but with undaunted spirit as she hugged each friend and marveled at the transformation their sacrifice had made possible. Her silver curls were styled differently to accommodate the small scar above her left temple, but her eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had sustained their community through its darkest hours. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," Rose whispered to Margaret as they walked through practice rooms equipped with traditional wooden dummies, modern fitness equipment, and meditation spaces that honored both Eastern philosophy and Western accessibility. "Vincent Kane tried to destroy us, but instead he gave us the resources to become everything we were meant to be." Frank Kowalski had established a veteran support program that combined physical therapy with martial arts training, helping elderly former servicemen maintain strength, confidence, and connection to others who understood the challenges of aging with honor intact. His weathered hands guided students through movements that honored both military discipline and traditional Eastern wisdom about finding power through balance rather than force. Eddie Matsumoto's corner of the center resembled a community technology hub where his electronics expertise served legitimate purposes, teaching digital literacy to elderly immigrants, providing security consultations to local businesses, and maintaining the sophisticated but now openly acknowledged surveillance systems that protected their neighborhood from future criminal infiltration. At 11 o'clock, the center's expanded programs were formally unveiled to applause that acknowledged not just facility improvements, but the community bonds that had survived systematic assault by organized crime. Traditional martial arts classes for all ages, shared scheduling with senior fitness programs, cultural education workshops that preserved immigrant heritage, and legal aid clinics that prevented future exploitation of vulnerable residents. Bryce Coleman's transformation from arrogant antagonist to humble assistant instructor represented the kind of personal growth that traditional martial arts training was supposed to facilitate. His social media presence had evolved from showcasing individual dominance to promoting community service, traditional values, and the wisdom he was slowly earning through genuine dedication to helping others rather than advancing personal fame. At noon, Danny stepped forward to address the gathered community, formally acknowledging his identity as Donnie Yin while explaining his decision to remain in San Francisco as the center's permanent director. His legendary status, no longer secret, attracted respectful attention that enhanced rather than threatened their community's security and resources. Legends aren't made through tournament victories or movie roles, Danny told the applauding crowd, his voice carrying the authority that came from proving himself through service rather than self-promotion. They're made through daily choices to use whatever abilities we possess in service of others, especially those who cannot protect themselves from systematic exploitation and violence. Margaret felt tears of gratitude as she watched children learning respect through martial arts training, seniors maintaining independence through fitness programs, and a community stronger than ever because they had chosen to stand together against overwhelming odds rather than surrender to criminal intimidation. Their sanctuary had been restored, but more importantly, their family had been proven unbreakable. 6 months later, March fog drifted through San Francisco's hills as evening settled over the Sunset Gardens Community Center, now bustling with over 400 weekly students, who had transformed their sanctuary into the thriving cultural hub Danny had always envisioned. Margaret Flynn moved through the gymnasium with confident grace, her silver hair gleaming as she led newcomers through Tai Chi forms that had become second nature, her transformation from concerned community member to skilled instructor complete. Frank Kowalski worked with veterans half his age in the adjacent room, his weathered hands guiding younger students through combinations of military discipline and martial arts philosophy that helped them overcome physical and emotional wounds. At 79, he had found purpose that transcended his own limitations, proving that wisdom and experience constituted their own forms of strength. Rose Patterson, fully recovered and more spirited than ever, had become the center's unofficial grandmother, welcoming each new student with a maternal warmth that made strangers feel like family within minutes of arrival. Her gentle humor and hard-earned wisdom about resilience created the emotional foundation that sustained their community through challenges both large and small. Eddie's corner resembled a high-tech command center where he taught electronics and cybersecurity while maintaining the security systems that protected their peaceful haven from future threats. His quiet competence provided the technical infrastructure that allowed their community to flourish without fear of criminal infiltration. At 7 o'clock, Danny watched his extended family with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered something more valuable than tournament victories or cinematic fame. Bryce, now 29 and completely transformed, led teenagers in meditation, teaching them to find strength in stillness and purpose in service to others. As evening classes ended and students bowed respectfully before departing, Margaret reflected on their journey from a simple Tuesday practice to battling organized crime to this moment of perfect peace. The center served hundreds, but maintained the intimate atmosphere that made it special. Danny continued teaching with gentle patience. But now his students knew they were learning from a legend who had chosen to be simply their teacher, protector, and friend. In the moonlit courtyard, Danny and Bryce practiced advanced forms together. Two generations united by respect, discipline, and understanding that the greatest victories were won through patient cultivation of character, community, and courage to stand up for what's right. Outside, San Francisco slept peacefully, protected by quiet heroes who proved daily that legends were made not through fame, but through the simple choice to serve others with unwavering dedication to justice. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.